Stefania Tomaskovic, PhD, serves as the Coalition Director for the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. She believes that a strong, resilient Texas is possible, one where every person can access safe, affordable housing, where every neighborhood has healthy air, water, and soil, and where our economy is strengthened by meaningful work opportunities that support healthy livelihoods without doing harm to each other or the environment. Prior to joining CEER, Stefania worked with Public Citizens. I actually worked with them as well, a national nonprofit group dedicated to representing the people's voice in the halls of power. Stefania has also worked as a chaplain and a geologist. Man, you have done everything. Welcome to Politics on Right, Stefania. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic today.
Well, look, we are ecstatic to have you here because we need folks of your caliber informing Houston and beyond. And the fact of the matter is we don't have enough people doing what you do. And when we have more people doing what you do with the exposure that should be given, we'll have a better America. Talk to me.
Yeah. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here is because I want to create a better America. And I know people are hungry for a better America. Yes. And so I'm with the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience, called CEER.
Right.
And we formed after Hurricane Harvey. And during that time, Hurricane Harvey was just such a catastrophe for our region. I don't know anyone who doesn't know someone who was very
affected,
harmed. Yeah. Exactly. But it's not only the fact that Harvey touched so many people across the region, it's the fact that Harvey brought to the surface the disparities that were already existing in the Houston area, but also widened them.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So people who were having a hard time already, there are still people who are recovering, who haven't had their homes fixed. And there have been studies talking about concentration of wealth, right? That even people who've been, who had flood insurance, that they were able to recover better. And actually, certain communities were able to obtain more wealth after Harvey than other communities, which have been just completely left behind. So that's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do, is because too many people are getting left behind. And with climate disasters becoming more frequent in the Houston area, it's not just Harvey, it's not just tropical storms and hurricanes. We've been battling a number of winter storms and really wild weather that is not normally what we have faced here in Houston. Those kinds of storms are really creating situations where people who are already struggling are struggling even more. So that's why I'm here. Well,
you know, you did I think a piece with you brought a PDF here, and I found the PDF so very instructing because you actually show how. Tell us a little bit about environmental justice, because a lot of people just look at environment as, rain's coming more than before and all of that. But what you did is you went ahead and broke that down. You actually showed that, it's not just an environmental crisis, but it's a people's crisis, and it affects people differently. Not only the environment, but even things like that you showed in the document with the cancer alleys and all that kind of stuff. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about environmental justice, because when we talk about environmental justice, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Right. But when you look at the history of the environmental justice movement, it really started in the early 1980s. And this is not to say that environmental injustice was not a thing before then, because, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated while he was in Memphis fighting for the rights of sanitation workers, which is definitely an environmental justice issue. But in the early 1980s in North Carolina, a rural Black community found out that they were going to be the dumping grounds for PCB-laden sediment soil. And they fought back because they did not want to be a dumping ground. Like who would, right? And that was really the birth of what we know now as the environmental justice community. Black and brown communities taking a stand against this dumping that has been happening over and over and over again across the country and in some places across the world, really. And that movement, even though the people in North Carolina and Warren, North Carolina were not successful at fighting that, it really spurred a movement that has worked to create justice for particularly Black and brown communities, lower income communities across the country that have been just enduring struggle after struggle, including environmental pollution that harms people's health. I think that's something that, you think about all the corporations that make profit off of this, while people who are already having difficulty, just making ends meet, are having to face cancer, having to face other health challenges that, they don't have the resources for because it's a systemic issue.
Right.
Like in Texas, we could have Medicaid expansion and we don't. Right. So there's a number of different issues. It's not just about the pollution in the environment. It's all these different factors coming together, these interrelated factors about healthcare, about education, about even historic things like redlining. Like, why are certain communities located where they are, and why are they historically having dealt with this pollution issue for decades and decades, right? So there's these historic factors for why, certain communities have become dumping grounds. And then there's the just where things are right now, right? In that a lot of communities are under-resourced, have been disinvested, and the government, local, state, federal, all of them have often failed communities in getting things cleaned up, et cetera.
When I saw your, when Tori came and he said, we got to get you in here, and I went ahead and looked at your bio. The first thing I looked, and when I saw all the different pieces and things, I said, she gets it. Because it's not a monolithical manner in which you have to handle this problem. Because I live in Kingwood, right? You were just talking about Harvey. And when we had Harvey, Kingwood was taken care of right away. Hell, the mayor came to Kingwood with a whole bunch of folks screaming at him to move their garbage out faster than anywhere else. I mean, in a week's time, Kingwood was, except for the homes that were flooded, and it was a whole bunch of them, but the cleanup went really quick. And later on, I had a friend that came from Atlanta to help folks, and he had a public kitchen going around Houston. And I went into neighborhoods that I had never been before that simply seemed to have been forgotten. And you, as well as I do, know what those neighborhoods look like. It was the Latino and the Black neighborhoods that were in Houston, which is a very multicultural, perfectly balanced city. And then we had the folks, many in Kingwood, complaining about they're not taking good care of what's going on in certain areas. And I was like, have you been to the rest of Houston? Do you know how bad a problems? So it was great to see that you got it. That we have an organization that gets it.
Yeah, thank you for that affirmation. It's really the way Houston is, right? People can forget about certain neighborhoods, right? It's like there's highways that divide communities. And I remember when I first moved to Houston, I was given the advice. Where
do you come from?
I was coming from Dallas.
Okay. Oh, okay. You're forgiven. You're forgiven, Tim. Look at Tori. Tori's shaking his head. I'm just messing
Everyone
with you.
in Dallas gave me a really hard time.
Are you coming to Houston? Yeah. Okay.
But I'm glad to be here. Houston it has its challenges, but it's also a really wonderful place, right? And, I think though, for a lot of people, like when I moved to Houston, someone told me, "Oh, don't live east of 45." It's like, what's east of 45? Right. There's a lot of Black
industry, Black community, Latino community, all that kind of stuff, which means they're not, for some reason, they don't get the services that you get even in a place like Montrose, come on. And what's hurtful is that so many don't see it. And that's why I said, when we have groups like your group that are out there, we need to get you on air. We need to make sure that you can tell, because you know what? Most people are good folk. I'm sorry. Most people are nice, period. Punto y final, But if you don't know, you don't know. And that's where organization like yours come in.
That's right.
What's the name of it again? CEER. What does it stand for?
CEER, the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience.
I can't remember all this. That's why CEER is a lot easier to... Is that how you say it, CEER?
CEER.
CEER, okay. CEER is a lot easier to say. Okay, tell me more.
Yeah. So there... People can not realize that in their own city that there are people left behind to the extent that they are, right? I think most people who don't know, it's not in their rear view mirror or in their windshield, neither one. Yes.
So tell me, how do you interface with community, your group?
We interface with community in a few different ways. We have essentially 4 different campaigns that we're taking part in. One is in regards to flood equity, right? So back in 2018, when voters in Harris County passed the flood bond, CEER was working with the county to ensure equity, because a lot of times what happens is money that's available for improving flood infrastructure goes to the wealthier communities, the whiter communities, the communities that already have a very loud voice at the table and are making those demands. So CEER stepped in because there was a need to ensure that other communities were not getting left behind in the process. So CEER worked with Harris County in the development of what was called the Harris Thrives Resolution. And this was a resolution that brought in equity into the equation and actually used the Social Vulnerability Index to help decide on project prioritization.
I want you to explain Social Vulnerability Index, because what happens is I have callers before, and not callers, but people in my chat, including right now. And by the way, welcome Bridge MCP, welcome Peggy Lopez, welcome Eric Hayes, Bruce Pollard, as well as Chris Meka. Thank you for being here. And the comments, I'll read your comments in a little bit, but thank you so kindly for being here online. Explain that, because what happens is a lot of folks are complaining well, how comes they changed the formula and the way the money was dispersed? Somehow we're not getting our fair share. This particular county precinct got more than the other.
Right. So it's a way of the prioritization framework is a way of addressing need, right? And really putting worst first so that people who need support are getting the support that they need. When you look at some of the ways that funding can often be allocated, they use things like what's called benefit cost analysis, where what they're doing is looking at a few different factors, but one of those factors is property values.
Oh, God.
Right?
I was just going to talk about that, and I finished that because I had something to say there. Go ahead.
Yeah. So they're looking at property values in terms of determining whether someone is worth protecting. And that is just really unfair in terms of who it leaves behind. So that's how a lot of projects get approved in wealthier communities. And this way of using the Social Vulnerability Index is really prioritizing people who have fewer resources to recover, so that when the next Harvey strikes or any similar kind of flooding disaster, that they will already be in queue or maybe even have the projects completed so that they're not suffering the greatest impacts. Because, like I said, people are still recovering from Harvey. If you aren't aware of that, it's true.
And it's amazing how many don't really know about. Stefania, when you brought up the property values, this is the part that got me crazy, because I had friends that, live in these big homes, and they got 6 inches of water or something, and there was some part of the law that allowed them to take huge tax breaks and also got a bigger funding for that house. And then I said, well, somebody in Timbuktu, Houston, who has a $50,000 home, wooden home, and they got flooded. It's their home, it's their lodging, it's where they stay. Just like that person who lives in that $500,000 home, that's where they live, that's where they stay. You're saying that because, or the way a lot of these formulas work, because you live in this expensive house, the cost benefit analysis is like, oh, let's save these things because it, the house costs more. Costs more to whom? I mean, they call homes a capital investment, right? Mm-hmm. You decided to invest in your capital that's worth a whole lot of money. Well, you take the risk just like everybody else. And, a home is a home, it's a home, right?
Yeah, right. No one's home should have to go through that. And people shouldn't have to fight so hard to get recovered.
Yeah.
And, another thing that can often happen, too, is the way that titles are passed down. Mm-hmm. In white communities, it's often very clear who is the title holder for mm-hmm. a home, where in particularly like the Black community, it can be a lot more complicated to determine heirship and who actually owns the home. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of like FEMA coming in and, providing funding for mm-hmm. repairs, they need the homeowner to sign off on that. Right. And so there actually has to be work done to determine who actually is the title holder. And so those are things that either slow down or completely halt the process. And there's just these systemic barriers that don't take into consideration how things are passed along in different families, right? So there's these challenges that happen along the way that are rooted in just kind of the
it's systemic. It's the history of the country. Yes, mm-hmm. we've had redlining. Yes, we've had racism. Yes, we've had all these things. What is there not to understand that, again, like I said, it's great that we have the CEERs of the world being able to help navigate those kinds of things, because most people just throw their hands up in the air and say, well, there's nothing we can do. And they steadily fall behind and behind and behind. And societally, they can never, ever recover and become that, what they possibly and could be.
Right. And then throw a global pandemic on top of that.
Talk to me.
A winter storm.
Talk to me.
Another winter storm.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I can't tell you how many people I've heard about whose pipes froze mm-hmm. and, out of power for a week, right?
So now let me ask you this. We've been talking about, we talk a lot about global warming, and let's talk about how do you think first it affects us locally, because you talk a lot about helping people in Houston. How would that affect us locally?
Yeah, one of the challenges mm-hmm. of, I think, the climate movement is it initially, for a lot of people, when they think about climate change, they think about ice sheets, they think about mm-hmm. polar bears.
Right.
They're not thinking about Houston.
Right.
And our climate justice organizer was out talking with community members about climate change one day. And she told me this story. This one woman she talked to said, climate change, I don't know anything about climate change, but what I know is that people in my community are dying.
Oh, wait. Who told you that?
This was a community member in Northeast Houston.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And, for a lot of us, we're not necessarily thinking about climate change in Houston and the impacts, but there's these daily impacts that we face from it. We've had some of the hottest weather on record.
Yeah.
February, I think, was one of the hottest months on record. And I am just really becoming aware that the first half of my life is significantly cooler than the second half. Mm-hmm. And that has big impact in Houston because heat stress is real. Heat stress is real. It impacts people's health. Not everyone can afford electricity to pay for air conditioning, mm-hmm. right? And when you have more and more days over 90 degrees, over 95, over 100 degrees, that's going to have a real impact on people's pocketbooks and on their health.
And the health thing is so real because even now my trees. Oh, by the way, I have a little funny thing here. You said you realized that the first half of your life was cooler than the second half of your life. As you get older, my friend, you're going to realize that more and more and more. And I'm not talking temperature here. We were all cool when we were young, and then we get older. That's all. I was trying to make a corny joke. Anyway, but as it turns out, I've never had the kind of problems with pollen and all these things in the air in February, which means we have a longer seasons that we're going to have all these types of nasal problems and all of that we're not used to. And that also means, you spoke about cost, etc. That also means higher costs for medical care, higher costs for drugs, higher costs for just about everything.
That's right. That's right. So that is one of the ways that climate is impacting us locally, is just these kind of daily stressors, allergies from pollen, heat, and these things take a toll on our money, on our health. And, I feel like that's a thing that people miss a lot when we talk about climate change. Of course, then there's the big things, right? Like the Harveys and the winter storms, this weird weather that, the hurricane systems in the Gulf forming really rapid storms, really intensifying quickly. Like that makes it a lot harder to predict what's going to happen in the Gulf when hurricane season is in full force, right? So that makes it challenging. It's a lot easier to prepare for a storm, even if you have like a week's notice. But when something forms in the Gulf and becomes a tropical storm in a day, like what was that tropical storm Imelda in 2019?
We never knew it was coming almost. I mean, we knew it was going to be a light thing, but it just kind of exploded, you know. But, we have, hello, Alistair Waters. How are you doing? Lee Grant, welcome. All the crew is here. Bruce wants to know for you, have the results of the Climate Ambassadors Survey been published? I don't know if you know about that or...
Yeah, I can tell a little bit about the Climate Ambassadors.
Okay.
So CEER has a Climate Ambassador program. We work with about 14 community leaders in Northeast Houston. And a while ago, I think it was 2020, it was before and during the early phases of the pandemic. CEER's organizers worked with people in Northeast Houston to develop this program. And then the ambassadors actually did a survey of community members to really help us figure out how we were going to approach these issues and what issues we wanted to focus on. And so with that, what we found people really cared about was having healthy, safe housing, right? And that has led us into developing not just policy solutions for weatherization for people's homes, so that in hot conditions, but also in cold conditions, like what happened in 2021, people can remain in their homes and stay fairly comfortable. Right. Exactly. Right. There's ways to do that through weatherization. And so we want to expand the policy so that it covers more people and people can get their homes.
So let me see if I understand you correctly. Are you saying the ambassadors come to you with the solutions that they think for their particular communities? Is that correct?
Yeah. So that was the purpose of that questionnaire, was for the ambassadors to work with their community and determine what were the solutions that we should focus on?
And when it comes to the weatherization, do you all provide, how does that work? Do you all provide like contracting or help in finding contractors? You get subsidies from the federal government, or how does it work?
We don't do that kind of work. Right now, there are programs. There's a program through Baker Ripley where people can sign up and participate. Sometimes the wait list can be really long, just to put it out there. And so we are currently working with them and other partners, including the Houston Advanced Research Center, on a pilot program. And our ambassadors and some of our ambassadors are going to be essentially working as community navigators to help people apply for the program and kind of case manage, right? So that people can have support going through the program, so that it's not just filling out a form and not hearing back for a long time. And so it's a way to kind of maintain a relationship and answer questions and help people with the process. But the design of that is actually going to be done working with community through different engagement opportunities like focus groups and things like that. So we're actually going to be co-designing this process.
So you go into different neighborhoods and try to hold town halls and that sort of thing? Or?
I'm not sure exactly what it's going to look like, to be honest. We're just in that phase
working on it now.
Exactly. But we do want it to be co-designed with our community members.
That is great. Eric, you said that I wasn't truthful on something. Please give us a call, 713-526-5738. You know, if you think that I am not truthful, I would want to make sure that I am corrected for my audience, because again, we don't want, politics don't write, ain't ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBCs, and those that will mislead you. So if you think I said something incorrectly, please give us a call at 713-526-5738. Bruce says, did this survey support the new solar farm being constructed to help provide energy when needed?
So the solar farm that's being constructed right now is in the Sunnyside community, and that is not something CEER has been involved with, but I know there's been a lot of conversations in Sunnyside about that project. So we haven't been specifically involved in that, and the survey didn't cover that part of Houston. We've been focusing in Northeast Houston.
Yeah, one of our listeners also want to tell you, hey, I'm in Myrtle Beach. Let's see what she says. Egberto, tell her Myrtle Beach residents shocked by mass of pollen. So maybe if people all over the country, we get callers from all over the country. So I mean, maybe if all these places throughout the country start to see this, maybe they'll start voting in people that will really take climate change and all this stuff seriously. I have some in the chat that's like, gas is more efficient than solar. Just give me my gas. And it's like short-sightedness. You know, how do you talk to somebody like that? What would you tell them? I know what I say. What would you tell them?
So I like to start with what I know and what the facts are. And so I just think back to 2021 and how natural gas failed the state of Texas.
Oh, you know, you're so smart. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's funny, because they had to lie immediately when the failure started. They said the turbines went down, the cold weather got them, and it turned out that it was frozen gas equipment that caused our crash, our electric grid crash. Yeah. And when you look at the data, renewables actually saved us. Yes. and overperformed relative to what they thought the renewables would do. So right, there was a lot of misinformation that was coming out from the government. From Austin. They were lying, and what's interesting is that even as they lie, we are one of the states that have the largest wind farms out there. We are one of the states that are doing a lot of work in renewables. And to have a government, after you have not only the private sector, but some of the federal sector doing so much in green energy, and to have our local or state government lie to the people. I know I know you don't talk political so much, but I mean, it's shameful that actually occurs, don't you think? I'm just talking about not political, just a truthful thing. I agree. It's shameful that something like that happened, that people were not told the truth about what happened, and that in Austin, there's a continual push for fossil fuels that are exacerbating the problems that we're having here. And you know what is so sad about that? In as much as we are energy producing state and that we have a lot of oil wells and so forth, the funny thing about it is, if we were just to double up on renewables, the cost back for renewables in the long run is so much greater, because we don't have to dig deep holes. We don't have to pressurize holes to put waste in. All of them. We don't have to frack. We don't have to do all those things if we just invested where you get the biggest bang for the buck. Right. And I think the costs have really come down. So this is a great time to be investing in renewable energy. You know, I tell folks, let's fly over Houston, right? I'm looking at a vast power station unused. Every single roof is a power station unused. And that, I tried to get some cells on my home once and realized that the economic system under which puts these cells out is pretty, for all practical purposes, is fraudulent. They come out and they tell you, I know what the cell costs. I know all of that. And I got two different quotes, same amount of stuff, with a difference in price of over $30,000. Wow. Does that tell you who, it's not, it's like they want to capitalize on everything as opposed to saying good energy. This is one of the places where I think we need to have the government step in and say, we are going to just throw cells on every roof, everybody's roof. We increase taxes here. I mean, just think about what that would look like, you know?
One of the things I'm excited about right now is, last year, federal government passed the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes.
And it's not perfect in a lot of ways. It could invest a lot more money into addressing climate change. And there's some really great opportunities there too, including the greenhouse gas emissions reductions programs that their EPA is currently developing. So I would love to see what comes out of it and what that looks like and how that might impact distributed solar or community microgrids or other ways.
I love that concept of the community, the microgrids and this, distributed solar panels. Solar, you know what I'm talking about. Now, in your PDF that I saw there, you were talking about the parts of Houston where things are really, it kind of shows you that if you look at the demographics of certain areas, that you actually see there are certain kind of industries there, there are certain kind of illnesses there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. There's a group here in Houston called the One Breath Partnership that did a really good report called the Houston Arrow. I recommend people go and check that out because one of the things that that report did is it really highlighted the varying inequities across Houston in a geographic way. So you can look at a map and see, okay, in this map, this area has, the most education. These areas have the least amount of education. You can go through for all these different parameters, right. Exactly. And you see that the map pretty much stays the same, right? And one of the things I was really shocked to learn several years ago was that in Harris County, there is a 23-year difference in life expectancy depending on what zip code you live in.
You have got to be kidding me.
I am not kidding you. 23 years.
Really?
Yes. So your zip code has a huge influence on your health in Harris County. And I don't believe that anyone should have to live with a reduced lifespan because of where they live.
And some people, they have no choice.
Exactly.
And people get upset when you talk about having to mitigate these things, right? Why are you giving them that, or how did they get there in the first place?
Yeah.
How did they get there in the first place? A lot of people get upset when I speak certain way about what corporations do and how how government results in getting them to do. But if we take a look at what you're saying here, we have the concentration of certain types of plants in certain areas. We have the concentration of certain types of medical things in certain areas. But here's the real kicker, right? I remember when I had my kid and I decided, I was living in the A-Leaf area, et cetera. And when it was time for my daughter to start school, I went ahead and did a map as well. And I mapped out where all the best schools were. And at that time, it was Katy and Kingwood. Those were the two, and that's where we bought a house, right? And then you realize afterwards that the way our system works, right? It's like because the prices of homes in certain areas are more expensive, those schools get a bigger piece of the pie. As opposed, it's called public education, right? When you drive on a road in whatever part of Houston, right? You didn't figure out if your taxes paid for that piece of the road or the other piece of the road. But when it comes to education, if you live in a good zip code, and this is compared to what you just said about life expectancy, when you live in a good zip code, you're going to have a good school. You live in another zip code, you're going to have a school that has leaks and all these things. And it's all the same public education. Right.
And not every school even has school nurses. Right. And there's a number of schools that are under-resourced that I believe deserve to have education, access,
all of that is a part of your the justice,
yes.
the even environmental justice, if you want to be. And you had 4 pieces to that environmental justice that I wrote down. I think it was race. It was there was something.
Yeah. So the way that I see environmental justice is this recognition between everything being connected. These issues that we're talking about,
Right.
education, healthcare, they're not unrelated. These are connected issues.
And I think people have to understand what that specifically. A lot of folks want to take these things in chunks, but as you pointed out, they are all interrelated. They don't stand alone or apart.
Yes, that's right. That's right. It's people who lack affordable housing options will often find themselves in situations where they have to live next to a plant,
right?
Because that's the house that's available to them,
right.
or because of where they live, plants have come in,
right?
Because
they can do it there, but they couldn't do it. Not in my backyard. What is it?
Right, NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard.
I hear a lot of people say, "Well, could they build this concrete batch plant in River Oaks?"
Thank you.
Right?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and people look at it as, well, there's that, as if that doesn't exist, and people want you to stay quiet about it, or if you raise hell about it, they want to call you a radical or the big S and all these kind of things. And we're saying, no, we just want to have an equitable society. I don't think we're not asking for everybody to be equal if they don't work towards where they want to go, but we want an equitable society. Everybody have equal access to success or equal access to failure, right?
I believe everyone should have access to clean air, clean water, and opportunities, right? So yes, I think that's like that everyone should it should be a baseline, right, for people to have the access to those things. I
want to show you the mentality of some, right? Because whenever you point out that, whenever you pointed out this 23-year difference in zip code, and the first thing, like, this is not a bad guy who said it, but the first thing that this guy came up with was, he's a good guy. I know him. And he says, I wonder how much of the reduced lifespan as to is due to crime and homicide. And whether that's, I imagine that, let me answer that first, and then I'm going to ask you to come in. Look, part of that is going to be crime and homicide, because we know that crime and homicide is more prevalent based on socioeconomics, irrespective of race. Based on socioeconomics, there's a higher degree of homicide and all these sort of things. So that's one issue. But then you have to ask the genesis of the homicides and the genesis of why those things occur. And it goes right back into what Stefania says. All these externalities, lower education, and you can take it up from there, my dear.
Sure. When I worked as a chaplain, I worked with cancer patients, and I saw people of all ages, all races, all faiths, and while this is not any really comprehensive data analysis, there were some things that I really picked up in terms of, from people's stories about their life experiences, about what things in their environment had impacted them, whether they were living across from a refinery, right, or some other kind of industrial facility. And so that definitely has shaped my perspective on how I see these kinds of differences in lifespan. I am not an expert on homicide or crime rates. I think you're right in that, there are, everything is connected, right? Like I was just saying, right, these things are not separate. And what needs to happen is investment in communities where there may be higher crime rates, where there may be higher rates of homicide, and not just investing in police, but really investing in a holistic way to invest in communities' well-being, to support them, to help with education, ensuring clean water, ensuring there's no lead in the schools. Because that
also attributes to criminality, because of lead and what it does to the mind.
Right. These environmental factors impact the body, they impact the brain. It's not isolated. Right. These things all come together. So I would advocate for just greater investment in communities. If we for a change decided to do those kinds of investments, and I tell you what I think would bring that. I have a phrase on my program says, whenever we unite the barrios
the ghettos and Appalachia, then we will win. We'll get the results that we've got. And this is what I mean by that. And it's a stereotype. It's a stereotype the way I say it. But the idea is what Houstonians and many Americans don't see is they don't see the life, what a lot of white people look like in Appalachia, which doesn't look any different than black folks in the ghettos and others in the ghettos, etc., that we are used to seeing here in these cities. My daughter, while she was at studying at med school, she took this job one summer and she went through Appalachia, and I remember when she called me shocked. She said, I'd never seen people living in these conditions. She was doing her doctor thing inside of parts of Ohio, parts of PA, etc. And then I said to her, that is what, whenever people see degeneracy, or whenever people see poverty, or whenever we see all of that on TV, it looks like me, right? It looks like my Latino brothers and sisters, right? But it doesn't look like my white brothers and sisters. And why is all of it? You wonder what is the mechanism that prevents that. And that is, if those three folks realize their commonality and what needs to get done, things that you are trying to put out there, imagine the changes that would occur, because suddenly those people that think it's just the others that live that way would say that can also happen to me. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there is way more that unites us than divides us.
Exactly.
And we should be working together.
Absolutely. Dr. Stefania Tomaskovic, thank you so kindly. She's the director of Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. Thank you so kindly for having been here with us on Politics Done Right.
Such a pleasure.
And please remember, this is your place. Anytime you have something to say, just come on out, okay? We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.